Russia and much of Eastern Europe are united by communist ideology. Ruled with an iron fist, the Soviet Union is locked in a bitter political struggle with the West.
Relations were bad, but no one really knew how bad, how dangerously bad they were.
Initially, Soviet officials deny responsibility for the KAL disaster.
The story came out of Moscow was that the plane appeared, we intercepted it, tried to make it stop, it didn't, it flew away. That was the first story.
But soon they reverse course and come clean. A Soviet fighter jet did in fact shoot the plane down, but they insist the attack was justified.
The Soviet view was that it was on a spy mission, perhaps carrying instruments, cameras, recorders and so forth.
The Soviet Union claims Flight 007 entered highly restricted airspace under orders from the US government. But the US insists KAL 007 was a routine passenger flight. The dispute only heightens political tension.
In terms of an actual shooting war, the closest points that we may have come were in that year, both before and after, when both sides, particularly the Soviet side though, was expecting an attack.
The KAL disaster would put NATO nuclear disarmament talks in jeopardy. The Soviets would ultimately walk away. The nuclear threat is growing. Under such circumstances, the need for an impartial inquiry is urgent. The UN calls on the International Civil Aviation Organization.
ICAO offers a neutral investigation, an investigation team that can deal with all parties involved in a neutral way.
Kai Frostel joins the international team of investigators that will try to uncover the truth behind the destruction of Flight 007. With two superpowers squaring off, they're under pressure to find answers, and find them fast. KAL 007's flight plan should have kept it well away from Soviet airspace. Either it was shot down over international waters, or the flight had strayed off course. Figuring out which is the first priority for investigators. But they face a huge obstacle. The plane's black boxes are still missing.
The lack of flight recorders, data recorder, cockpit voice recorder, that's significant in an investigation.
The Americans joined forces with South Korea and Japan in the search for the crucial devices. But the three allied nations are not the only ones searching.
On September 1st, we got an order to go to the place where the Boeing fell and take part in the search for the Boeing 747.
It's a race to find the black boxes. The Americans know they may never get the truth if the Soviets find the boxes first. Each side accuses the other of dirty tricks.
The U.S. did formally complain that the Soviets would either sail across U.S. ships, that they would drop false pingers to deflect listening devices away from the true pinger.
The Soviets claim Flight 007 was flying in Soviet airspace over Sakhalin Island when they shot it down. If that's true, the aircraft was well outside its designated aerial corridor, a route known as R20.
Across the North Pacific, there are various routes that are labeled that R20 was the one closest to Soviet airspace. Red Route 1 was a nickname for it. It was the one closest. And so it was known to be, or should have been known to be, a route that you took extra precautions on.
Investigators get their first hint that if the crew was flying in restricted airspace, they didn't know it.
The coordinates they were reporting, it put them on course.
The Tokyo air traffic controller who last communicated with Flight 007 tells investigators that all seemed normal.
Green Air 007, position over Nippy, estimating NOCA 1826132.0.
The crew reported they were flying the R20 route. But as with every other flight over the Pacific, 007 was beyond Tokyo's radar range. The controller could only rely on the pilots to verify their position. Perhaps they were mistaken about where they were. That possibility becomes more likely when investigators talk to the crew of the Korean Airlines flight that was just minutes behind Flight 007.
Tell me about the exchange with Flight 007.
The captain of the second flight recounts an odd conversation with the 007 crew.
We're experiencing an unexpectedly strong tailwind.
How much of a tailwind?
35 knots, 040.
We still have a 15-knot headwind.
Could he be getting a headwind if he was here?
It would be almost impossible for one flight to have a tailwind and the other a headwind. Something doesn't add up. But with the black box still missing, investigators have no way of knowing where KAL 007 actually was at the time of that exchange.
That made it very difficult in the way that we had no direct information that I would normally have as an accident investigator.
Frostel gets more information from an unlikely source, the US military. In a rare move, US officials share highly classified surveillance data from the night of the shootdown. A top-secret technology called passive radar can track the movements of every military and civilian plane around the globe. What it reveals about KAL 007 is stunning. The plane was way off course. For almost its entire journey across the Pacific, the flight had been drifting north. By the time it was shot down, Flight 007 was 560 kilometers, or 350 miles north of where it should have been, and had already flown in and out of Soviet territory. The Soviets were telling the truth.
And then it becomes a question of determining why was it off course that much.
To find the answer, investigators turned their attention to the navigation system on board the 747. It's called INS, the Inertial Navigation System.
The INS that was used on this airliner, like most in that time period, had an accuracy of about half a mile of drift per hour. Very accurate. It would get you where you wanted to be.
The system relies on coordinates, or waypoints, entered into the flight controller.
The way it works is that there is 9 waypoints that you put in. That's the way you program it.
59 degrees, 18.0 north.
Waypoints are essentially GPS coordinates that also have one-word names, like Bethel, Neva, or Nippy. Flight 007's INS should have been programmed to find and follow those electronic guideposts to Seoul.
18.0 north.
At 849, turn left heading 270.
Perhaps there was some last-minute change in the flight plan. Kai Frostel listens to the pre-flight conversation between the crew and the tower in Alaska.
Net at 473, turn right.
Korean Air 007, climb and maintain flight level 310.
Net at 473, turn right heading 0.
It was total routine from the beginning to the end. There was nothing exceptional with the takeoff or the taxiing to position, the preparation for the flight.
After leaving Anchorage, the 747 flew out over the Pacific just as planned. But it never made it to the first waypoint. Instead, it drifted off course for more than 5 hours. Hope of uncovering the reasons why begins to fade. A 10-week effort to recover the flight recorders has turned up nothing. The search is called off.
The actual aircraft, where it was and how many pieces it was, remained unknown.
With the investigation stalled, Frostel turns to the plane's manufacturers.
the US and Boeing offered to simulate the